There are 613 laws in the Old Testament according to Jewish tradition. How can God be good? By dishing out so many of them. But besides the fact that there's so many of these laws seem weird and confusing, or they make God look like a self-centered, micromanaging killjoy. And then you have things like regulations for slavery and commandments for the death penalty. What do we do with all this? Welcome to the fourth video in our series of Bible difficulties. Perhaps the first concern is you wonder, wait, am I supposed to obey all of these laws? Why aren't churches still sacrificing animals and stuff like that today? Well, the short answer is that Christians think differently about the Old Testament commands because they've already been done for us. Jesus fulfilled the law according to Matthew 5:17. But of course, that doesn't solve all of the concerns when we read through these commands. In order to understand what is going on with all these laws, we need context, because when we open up to the first pages of the Bible, we see this beautiful image of life in the presence of God. That's the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1 and 2. God is there, walking with them. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. But then Adam and Eve disobey God. In other words, they sinned. Sin is this corrupting force that pulls us away from God. So they are kicked out of the garden, expelled from life in the presence of God. Notice that the problem is we've lost the presence of God. Now, most of these laws begin in Exodus 20 and go through the end of Deuteronomy. One chapter earlier, Exodus 19, God returns back to his people. So that's big. The presence of God is back. It's both marvelous and wonderful, but also extremely intense. The problem is there's still sin among the people. So what does God do? God gives a long list of laws so that the people can live as a nation hosting his presence. And so all these laws are actually an act of God's goodness because they enabled a way for his people to regain what was lost at the Garden of Eden. The presence of God is returned. Still, you may wonder, why so many laws? But keep in mind, God is establishing a nation. These people in Exodus 20 were just recently saved from slavery in Egypt. So now you have this massive group of people with no government. How many laws exist to govern the countries we live in? Quite a lot. And that's what it takes. Now, if you take time to read these laws, you will discover pretty quickly God has a massive concern for the weak, the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, the foreigners, the blind, the crippled. How do we live as a nation taking care of these people? How do we live generously? How do we live with fair business practices? And so you have Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 24, Leviticus 19. Read that and see for yourself. And then take the 10 commandments, honor God, honor your parents, don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat on your spouse, and so on. Don't you think this world would be a better place if people obeyed these commandments? I mean, Jesus was absolutely right when he said that the entirety of God's law could be summed up in the command to love God and love your neighbor. God is not trying to be a killjoy. He's trying to show us a way of life. But another big purpose for these laws was concerned about holiness. And this really gets into the fact that God is now dwelling with his people. So you have laws about how to build God's house and the priesthood and animal sacrifices. Many of them don't make sense to our ears. And that's where you can pick up a good commentary. And I'm not talking like study Bible notes or even a full Bible commentary, but like a thick book just on Leviticus, if you can handle that level of nerd in your life. And it will just tell you the best it can. Maybe you're wondering, well, why is a burnt offering supposed to be male? Well, probably because the burnt offerings were intended to benefit the people and male animals were more expendable. A herd could still multiply with only a few males. Why must the internal organs and legs be washed? Probably because you don't want to bring poop into the presence of God. We could go on, but I would stress that we don't have to get too tripped up with all this. We may not understand everything because we don't live in that time period or that culture, but it made sense to God's people back then, and they celebrated the commands of God. In fact, the longest song of praise recorded in the Bible, Psalm 119, it's one massive poem dedicated to praising God for giving his laws. Most other nations at the time basically had to guess what their God wanted, but the God of Israel made it clear. Some people are troubled by the command from God to worship God. Makes sense. Thing is, we often picture God as a human when we lay this critique on him, because obviously that would be insane for a human to command the worship of other people. It's happened before and it never ends well. But with God, he is in a totally different category. Any good Christian theology will tell you that God doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need emotional support like people do. So however we understand the commands from God to worship him, it's not to make God feel better about himself. I would say this: people naturally set their affections on their favorite sports team or on money or success or whatever, but those things will fail us because they are not truly worthy of worship. Only God is worthy of worship. And so when we worship God, even if it means giving up other things, we are fully aligned with our purpose and our natural selves. So like any other law from God, it's for us. It's for our good. But then you get these commands or regulations in the laws of God that just feel wrong. You have slavery. You have the death penalty for so many things. We're going to cover those in the next video of this series. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.